When the cry first echoed through the courtyard, Eleanor Hayes thought it was the wind. The manor was a lonely place after midnight. Stone walls that whispered, corridors that held their breath. But when the sound came again, thinner, sharper, unmistakably human, she froze. A baby. On the front steps of Harrowgate Hall. Her hands trembled as she lifted the iron latch and opened the great oak door. The storm outside hissed like a living thing, sweeping across the courtyard. And there, half covered by a soaked wool blanket, was an infant, pale, shivering, and alive. Eleanor's first instinct was fear, not compassion. Nothing good ever came to servants who found things they weren't meant to find. Yet something in the child's faint whimper pierced straight through her. She gathered it up in her arms. The blanket was finer than anything she'd ever owned, embroidered with gold thread. By the time she reached the scullery, the candlelight caught the edge of a seal stitched into the corner, the Ashworth family crest. The child was no orphan from the village. This was a child of the house. Before she could think, footsteps sounded above. The Lord himself, Henry Ashworth, appeared at the top of the stair, his dressing gown half-tied, his face cold as marble. "What in God's name are you doing awake?" Eleanor bowed her head, cradling the baby close. "My lord, there was crying outside. I found this—" When he saw the blanket, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Panic. Then calculation. "Give it to me." "My lord." "I said give it to me, Eleanor." She obeyed, her hands reluctant to let go. He took the child roughly, looked down at it for a long, silent moment, and whispered words she wasn't meant to hear. So she went through with it. Eleanor's heart thudded. "My lord, what shall I do? Shall I fetch the nurse?" "No." His voice was steady now, chillingly so. "You'll fetch a spade." She blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "A spade? Before sunrise. No one must see this. Do you understand?" He turned, walking toward the study with the baby still in his arms. The last thing she heard was the quiet click of the door closing. When Eleanor reached the servants' quarters, her knees nearly gave way. She had scrubbed floors, polished silver, and carried secrets for 17 years at Harrowgate Hall, but never had she been asked to bury one. The grandfather clock struck 1. Outside, the rain had stopped. A single candle burned beside the kitchen window, its flame trembling like her own resolve. She waited an hour, then another. The house slept. The study door remained closed. At 3 in the morning, she could bear it no longer. She crept down the hall, silent as dust. The study door was ajar. Inside, the Lord sat slumped in his chair, an untouched decanter beside him. The cradle was empty. The hearth was cold. And then she saw it. Faint footprints in the mud on the carpet, leading toward the old chapel door. Her heart began to race. She followed them through the side corridor, out into the damp courtyard. And there, a small mound of freshly turned earth beneath the yew tree. The spade leaned against the chapel wall, still slick with soil. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Dear God," she whispered, "forgive me if I'm wrong." With trembling hands, she began to dig. The soil was soft from rain, and every scoop of earth felt heavier than her own conscience. Eleanor's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The yew tree loomed above her like a witness, its branches dripping with the last of the storm. Half a foot down, her spade struck something solid. Not the sound of wood or stone. Something softer, wrapped. She pushed aside the mud with her hands until her fingers brushed fabric. The blanket. Her stomach twisted as she pulled it free, heart pounding with dread. But the child was not there. The bundle was filled with stones, smooth river stones, waited to sink or deceive. She fell backward, the truth slicing through her. The Lord had pretended to bury the baby, which meant the child was still alive. Somewhere. She wiped her hands on her apron, smearing mud across the white linen. Her thoughts ran wild. Where could he have taken it? To whom? The house was silent, save for the wind nudging the chapel door on its hinges. She rose, trembling, and stepped inside. The chapel smelled of damp stone and candle wax. It had been years since anyone had prayed there. The family preferred London society to Sunday devotion. Yet now, a single candle burned on the altar, and beside it, the baby, wrapped again in its golden blanket, lying inside a wooden chest as if waiting for judgment. Eleanor sank to her knees, pressing her hand to the child's chest. The faint rhythm of a heartbeat met her palm. Steady. Alive. Its tiny lips moved soundlessly. She looked around the chapel, whispering, "He left you here to die." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't just cruelty. Lord Ashworth was afraid, not of scandal, but of exposure. Her mind raced. The crest, the secrecy, the midnight panic. The child wasn't some servant's mistake. It was his. The candle flickered. Eleanor glanced toward the door and froze. A shadow crossed the threshold. "Step away from the altar, Mrs. Hayes." It was her ladyship, Beatrice Ashworth, wrapped in a crimson robe, eyes hollow with sleepless fury. Eleanor obeyed, rising slowly. "My lady, I thought—" "You thought too much," Beatrice interrupted. "You were told to fetch a spade, not salvation." Eleanor's heart hammered. "My lady, the child is not your concern." Beatrice's voice shook, though not from weakness. "Do you have any idea what happens if this reaches the papers? My husband's name, this house, everything we are built upon would collapse overnight." Eleanor stood her ground. "It's a living soul, my lady. You can't—" "Silence." The woman's mask cracked. "Do you think I don't know who she is?" The gardener's niece, a girl of 17 with soft eyes and no sense. My husband promised her a future, and when she gave him this, she gestured toward the cradle. He called it ruin. Beatrice stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He would have killed it to save his reputation. I told him not to touch the child until I decided what must be done." "So it was you," Eleanor whispered. "You told him to bury it?" Beatrice's lips tightened. "I told him to hide it until I could think. But if you've unearthed it, you've destroyed that chance." Eleanor's gaze dropped to the baby. "Then let me save it. I'll take it away, say nothing, go wherever you wish. You'll never hear of it again." Beatrice hesitated, the first crack of doubt. Outside, the manor clock tolled 4. Time was slipping. "And why?" she asked coldly. "Would a housekeeper risk her position, her freedom, for a child that isn't hers?" Eleanor didn't have an answer, not one she could admit, because she had once stood in the same shoes, 17, foolish, with a child who hadn't survived the winter. Her silence was enough. Beatrice read the truth in her eyes. "Very well," the lady murmured. "Take it. Before sunrise. If Henry learns what you've done, he'll have you dismissed. Or worse. You understand that?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, my lady." "Go through the backwoods. The gardener's cottage is empty this week. Leave before dawn." As Eleanor wrapped the child once more, Beatrice lingered near the candle, staring down at it. "God forgive me," she whispered, "for everything I'm about to lose." Eleanor didn't wait to hear more. She slipped out through the chapel door, the cold biting her cheeks, the baby's faint warmth pressed against her chest. The world beyond the manor was vast and dark, a sea of fog and moorland. She crossed the courtyard barefoot to avoid the sound of her shoes, clutching the infant tight. By the time she reached the outer gate, the eastern sky had begun to pale. She turned once, looking back at Harrowgate Hall, the place that had taken her youth and now demanded her soul. "Not this time," she whispered, and she vanished into the mist. Dawn crept over the moors like a ghost reluctant to be seen. Mist pooled around the hedgerows, and each step Eleanor took sent droplets scattering from the grass. The child in her arms stirred only once, a soft sigh against the wool of her shawl. She reached the gardener's cottage just as the first shafts of light touched the eastern sky. It stood half hidden behind a curtain of ivy, one room, one hearth, forgotten by everyone but the rats. Inside, she lit a candle, laid the baby on an old blanket, and pressed her hands to her face. What have I done? But deep inside, she already knew. For the first time in 17 years, she had acted on something other than obedience. By mid-morning, the manor bell began to toll. Once, twice, again. A summons. The staff would be gathering in the main hall. Her absence would be noticed. She could picture it already. Cook frowning, the maids whispering, and Lord Ashworth barking orders. They would search every corridor, every carriage house. Someone would remember the door unlatched, the footprints in the mud. She wrapped the baby tighter. "We'll leave by nightfall," she murmured. "I'll find work somewhere no one knows my name." The baby blinked up at her, blue eyes, unnervingly bright for something so small. She smiled despite herself. "You deserve a name," she whispered. "Clara. That's what I'll call you." Outside, hooves thundered down the lane. Eleanor peered through the cracked window. 2 riders, Lord Ashworth and the steward, headed toward the village. He must have realized the deception had been uncovered. Her heart pounded. She had hours, maybe less. She bundled the child, took what food she could find in the cottage, and followed the footpath toward the woods. Each branch seemed to lean closer, urging her deeper. She'd spent her life on these lands, but never beyond them. Now every step away from Harrowgate felt like betrayal and salvation at once. At the edge of the forest, she paused. A figure waited beneath the old oak. A man in a rough coat, hat pulled low. She almost screamed before recognizing him. "Thomas?" The coachman stepped forward, his face pale. "Mrs. Hayes. What are you doing out here?" "Nothing that concerns you." He glanced at the bundle. "The Lord's lost his wits. Says someone's stolen a child from the chapel. Promised £50 to whoever brings it back." Eleanor's stomach turned. "Then you'd best keep your distance." "Eleanor." His voice softened. "I saw you leave before dawn. I knew it was you." She stiffened. "Then why haven't you told him?" He hesitated. "Because I remember when you buried your own little one, and how no one cared." For a long moment, neither spoke. The baby fussed, and Thomas's gaze dropped to the tiny face. "Whose is it?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "The Lord's." His jaw tightened. "Then you'd best keep moving before he finds his conscience again." She nodded once. "If you ever cared for me, Thomas, forget you saw us." He stepped aside, eyes shining. "Go. There's an old hunter's lodge past the stream. No one goes there since the fire. You'll be safe a few days." She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. She hurried on, the trees swallowing her whole. By afternoon, the rain returned, soft and relentless. She reached the lodge, a shell of blackened timber and moss. But the roof held, and there was dry straw in one corner. She fed the baby, wrapped her close, and listened to the wind. For a few blessed hours, there was peace. Then the dogs came. At first, just a bark carried on the wind. Then another, louder, closer. The sound of men shouting her name. She snuffed the candle, clutching Clara tight. Through the broken slats, she saw torches weaving through the trees. The Lord's hunting party. Panic surged. She crawled to the back wall where a narrow trap-door led to the old root cellar. She pried it open, the hinges groaning like confession. The air below was thick with damp earth and mould. She climbed down, pulling the door shut above her. Darkness swallowed them whole. The baby whimpered once, before Eleanor pressed a trembling finger to her lips. "Shh, my darling." Just until they're gone, boots crunched overhead. Voices barked orders. "She came this way. Search the lodge." A shaft of light pierced through a crack. Eleanor held her breath as footsteps passed inches above her. And then, silence. For a full minute, she didn't move. Then a voice, cold and unmistakable. "Find her," said Lord Ashworth. "And if you can't, bring me proof she's dead." Eleanor's tears fell soundlessly onto the baby's cheek. When the torches faded and the forest grew still again, she whispered, "He'll never have you. Not while I breathe." She looked up through the crack of the trapdoor and froze. Someone else was there, standing in the doorway, holding a torch. Not one of the Lord's men, Beatrice Ashworth. The lady's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "You've made quite the mess, Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly. "But perhaps we can fix it together?" Beatrice held the torch like a priestess in some ancient rite, her face half lit, half shadow. The flames danced across her pale features, revealing exhaustion and fury in equal measure. Eleanor rose from the cellar, clutching the baby close. "If you've come to turn us in, my lady—" "Turn you in?" Beatrice's laugh was soft and hollow. "I've done enough turning in my life. Turning a blind eye, turning away from my husband's sins, turning myself into something unrecognizable." The wind hissed through the broken walls. Outside, the dogs barked again, far off but circling back. "You can't stay here," Beatrice said. "By dawn, he'll have men posted at every road." "He's furious, not because of the scandal, because he's lost control." Eleanor stared at her, uncertain. "Why are you helping me?" Beatrice's expression shifted, brittle and strange. "Because this child is the last piece of power I have left. And if Henry means to destroy it, then he means to destroy me too." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Then what are you asking?" Beatrice lowered her voice. "Take the baby, far from here. I'll tell Henry you fled into the marsh and drowned. He'll believe it. He wants to believe it." Eleanor's stomach turned. "And you?" "I'll remain here. Play the grieving wife. Let him think he's won. But in time—" She hesitated. "In time, I'll need you to return. I'll remain here. Play the grieving wife. Let him think he's won. But in time—" She hesitated. "In time, I'll need you to return." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Return?" Beatrice stepped closer, her perfume faint but unmistakably expensive, violets and despair. "When I call for you, you'll bring the child back. She'll be older then, and I'll present her as my niece, an orphan from the countryside. Henry will never suspect it was madness. Dangerous, deceitful madness. And yet, there was logic beneath it." "If I refuse?" Eleanor asked quietly. Beatrice smiled, not kindly. "Then the Lord will find you before morning, and both you and the babe will end up where you found those stones." A gust of wind blew through the doorway, dimming the torchlight. For a heartbeat, Eleanor considered it, the impossible choice: freedom or survival, conscience or safety. At last, she whispered, "I'll do it." Beatrice's shoulders loosened. "Good. You were always the sensible one." She reached into her robe and pulled out a folded envelope, sealed with red wax. "This contains £50 and a reference letter signed in my hand. It will name you as a widow seeking work in Yorkshire. Keep it hidden. If Henry finds it, we're both finished." Eleanor took it, fingers trembling. "And if something happens to you?" Beatrice's eyes glistened. "Then raise her as your own. But promise me. She must never know whose blood she carries." "I promise." Beatrice glanced at the sleeping baby, her features softening for the first time. "She has his eyes. God help us both." The sound of hooves thundered closer. Beatrice turned toward the door. "Go now. Through the old orchard gate. There's a path to the mill road. You'll reach the river by sunrise." Eleanor hesitated. "My lady?" "Don't thank me," Beatrice said sharply. "Just make sure she lives." Eleanor didn't look back. She fled into the night, clutching the child as the storm began again. Cold, relentless, almost cleansing. By dawn, she reached the river, collapsed beside the reeds, and stared at the horizon. The water glowed silver, and for a moment she felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. She opened the envelope. Inside were the promised banknotes, and a second note written in a hurried hand. "If I am found dead, it will not be by accident. Tell them the truth when she comes of age." B. Eleanor read the words again and again until the ink blurred through her tears. 2 days later, a notice appeared in the local paper. "Lady Beatrice Ashworth. Tragic accident during a morning ride." Horse spooked. Fatal fall near the chapel grounds. Eleanor's cup slipped from her hand when she saw it. The baby cried softly. She gathered her close, whispering, "Your mother was braver than anyone will ever know." That night, she buried Beatrice's note beneath the roots of an ash tree beside the riverbank, a promise to be kept when the time was right. And so the lonely housekeeper disappeared from the countryside, replaced by a widow named Eleanor Moore and her adopted daughter, Clara. 20 years passed, like the turning of a single season. The war had come and gone, and with it, the world Eleanor once knew. In a small Yorkshire town, she grew old quietly, keeping house for a modest clergyman and watching her adopted daughter, Clara, bloom into womanhood. Clara had her mother's grace, Beatrice's eyes, Henry's jaw, and none of their sins. She believed she was an orphan, the child of Eleanor's distant cousin, and never once questioned the story. But destiny has a habit of circling back, no matter how far one runs. It began with a letter, a thick envelope marked with a crest Eleanor had prayed never to see again, the Ashworth seal. Inside was a summons. "Lady Eleanor Moore, it has come to our attention that you once served at Harrowgate Hall. The estate is now without heir, following the death of Lord Henry Ashworth. Please attend the reading of his will. Fitzgerald and Crane, solicitors." Eleanor's hand shook as she read it. The same name, Fitzgerald. The same cold ink that had sealed her fate 2 decades earlier. She almost burned the letter. But Clara, curious as ever, had seen the crest. "Mother," she said, "why do they call you lady?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "A clerical mistake, I imagine." But that night, sleep would not come. She saw Beatrice's eyes again, that desperate promise in the candlelight. Tell them the truth when she comes of age. Morning found Eleanor already packing. "We're going to Harrowgate," she told Clara. "But why now?" Because some ghosts can't rest until they're named. The journey took 2 days. When the carriage crested the final hill, Harrowgate Hall rose from the mist like something carved from memory, older, emptier, yet unchanged. The great windows reflected the grey sky. Ivy smothered the stone. Inside the drawing room, a dozen strangers waited, lawyers, distant cousins, estate managers. And at the head of the table, an old man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Harrison Fitzgerald," he said softly. "You must be Mrs. Moore." Eleanor inclined her head. "I was, once." Before the world turned upside down, he smiled. "Then you may as well sit." "You've waited long enough," he began to read. The will was long and tedious, properties, investments, debts, until he reached the final clause. To the unnamed child, born within these walls on the night of November 12th, 1893, the child wronged by secrecy and spared by mercy, I leave the entirety of Harrowgate Hall and all that pertains to it. A murmur rippled through the room. Clara frowned. "What child?" Fitzgerald's gaze flicked to Eleanor. "Perhaps your mother can answer that." Eleanor felt the weight of 20 years pressing on her chest. She rose, every breath a confession. "The child," she said softly, "was found on the manor steps, left to die before sunrise. I took her away that night. I raised her as my own." Gasps filled the room. Clara's eyes widened. "You mean—" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "You are the rightful heir of Harrowgate Hall." Fitzgerald nodded gravely. "Lady Beatrice suspected as much. Before her death, she left instructions. A sealed letter to be opened upon Lord Ashworth's passing. Would you like to hear it?" He unfolded the brittle paper and began to read. "To my daughter, should she ever return. If you are reading this, then your father is gone, and the truth may finally breathe. You were born of shame, but you are not shameful. The woman who raised you gave you life twice, once in the cradle, and once in her arms when she fled this house. Harrowgate is yours. Protect it from the kind of pride that destroyed your parents, and if she still lives, forgive me. I was a coward who waited for dawn." Beatrice Ashworth. The room fell silent. Even the clock seemed to pause between ticks. Clara looked at Eleanor, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You saved me." Eleanor reached for her hand. "No, my dear. You saved me." Fitzgerald cleared his throat gently. "There is one final matter. Lord Ashworth's assets were placed in trust upon his death, pending the identification of the rightful heir. That heir has now been identified. Lady Clara Ashworth. Harrowgate Hall is yours." The others filed out in murmured disbelief, leaving only the two women and the lawyer. Eleanor turned to the window, staring out at the yew tree swaying in the courtyard, the place where the lie had begun. "I buried the truth there once," she said quietly, "and now it's come home to bloom." Fitzgerald smiled faintly. "Justice has its own clock, Mrs. Hayes. It's rarely early, but it never forgets." That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Eleanor walked alone to the chapel grounds. The yew still stood, its roots deep, its bark scarred by time. She knelt where she'd once dug through the mud, where fear had become defiance. Clara approached softly behind her. "Mother, will you stay here with me?" Eleanor smiled through tears. "For a while. Long enough to teach you what mercy costs." Together, they laid fresh flowers at the base of the tree, lilies for innocence and violets for courage. The wind carried the scent across the courtyard like a benediction. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt the air lift from her chest. She thought of Beatrice, of Thomas, of every secret that had kept her silent. Now the silence belonged to peace, not fear. The moon rose over Harrowgate Hall, silver and solemn. Inside, in the great hall that had once banished her, the new Lady Ashworth lit the chandeliers, one by one, until every room glowed. And in the soft echo of that light, the lonely housekeeper who had once defied a lord finally smiled. Because justice, though buried once beneath the yew, had found its way back to the surface. And if you liked this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. More Edwardian tales are yet to come,